Project Planning and Control, PPNC. Planning and Baseline Architecture. Course 2, Module 1, Part 2. Module 1 is the core, everything from Phase A concept development through the Phase BC gate, covering every PPNC planning product required to begin implementation. The key phrase here is executable plan, not a wishful plan, not an optimistic plan, but one you can actually defend at PDR and that will survive the scrutiny of the Standing Review Board. By the end of this module, you should be able to look at any program's planning artifacts and determine whether they're integrated, complete, and realistic, or whether they're setting the project up for early overruns. Planning is the only phase where you can still prevent problems cheaply. Once you're in Phase C, every gap becomes a cost and schedule event. From contract award to an executable baseline. This module focuses on the planning foundation of a government program, covering the process from early concept development through key program approval milestones. Participants will learn the importance of effective planning and the 9-step planning process, along with how to develop a work breakdown structure, estimate costs, and build an executable schedule baseline. The module also introduces earned value management, integrated baseline reviews, risk management, joint confidence level analysis, and contract management practices that help ensure successful program execution. By the end of this module, participants will be able to evaluate whether a program's planning products are complete, integrated, and ready for execution. The course covers key planning components, including work breakdown structures and the 100% rule, cost estimating and basis of estimates, schedule baseline development, and earned value management planning. It also explores integrated baseline reviews, risk management, joint confidence level assessments, and contract management practices that support effective program planning and control. 3 foundational governance principles frame how all government programs move through their life cycle. This is not bureaucracy for its own sake. It is the decision architecture that protects the agency's commitment to Congress. Designated decision authority is the key phrase. Every gate has a specific person accountable for saying yes. As a PPNC professional, your products are what that person evaluates before making that call. Governance provides the checks and balances, independent review, and dissenting opinions exist precisely because programs consistently underestimate technical risk and overestimate workforce efficiency. Programs that treat governance as administrative overhead rather than a decision quality mechanism tend to make the same kinds of errors, as demonstrated in the plan versus actual reality chart. Optimism is embedded from start. The Control Account Plan, CAP, is the time-phased resource plan that documents the work packages and planning packages at the level where work is being performed. It is the basic building block of the PMB. CAPs are updated monthly. They're living documents, not one-time planning artifacts. The PCM uses the CAP to evaluate planned versus actual performance for their account and to identify emerging variances early. The performance measurement technique assigned to each work package must be appropriate to the work, and that choice is made by the PCM, not the project controller. The PCM knows the work. The controller ensures the technique is applied correctly. The budget diagram here, work packages summing to control account budget with planning packages holding future scope, illustrates the architecture that makes the PMB credible. It is fully time-phased, fully scoped, and owned by the person doing the work. Work packages are the discrete, measurable units of schedule activity that produce a specific result. They're the building blocks of the PMB and the level at which earned value is measured. The discrete versus LOE distinction is fundamental. Discrete work has a definable endpoint that can be measured objectively, while LOE work is ongoing support activity measured by time elapsed. When too much of your budget is LOE, the EVM loses its early warning value. Work packages should follow the development cycle: fabrication, assembly, integration, test, not be defined as administrative reporting periods. If a work package lasts 6 months and cannot be broken down further, it probably shouldn't be a single work package. The 10% LOE rule of thumb exists because programs that creep above it tend to have a baseline that looks fine on paper but is not producing objective performance data. Watch the LOE percentage as a baseline quality indicator. Planning packages hold future scope that hasn't yet been detailed into work packages. They represent funded, scoped work that will be planned in detail as the project approaches that period. My rolling wave guidance. Planning packages normally convert to work packages no later than 6 months prior to scheduled start. But best practice is to convert them before the new fiscal year starts, so performance measurement can begin immediately on schedule. Planning packages do not receive a performance measurement technique because they aren't being actively performed. They're holding budget for future work. Converting them to work packages before that work begins is a key planning responsibility. The graphic shows planning packages sitting alongside work packages within a control account. This architecture enables the project to plan near-term work in detail while maintaining budget visibility for work that's 12 to 18 months out. PMTs are the EVM-defined methods for objectively calculating earned value. They answer the question, how do I know how much of the work has been accomplished, in an objective, non-manipulable way? PMT selection happens when the work package is detail planned, not at the beginning of Phase C. The technique must be appropriate to the type of work being performed, and changing it after it has been set requires documented justification. The effect on EVM data quality is significant. A poorly chosen PMT produces earned value numbers that are either artificially high, front-loading EV, or artificially low, back-loading EV, both of which mislead the analysis. The bottom line, PMTs exist to provide an objective measure of accomplishment. When they're used correctly, EVM reveals reality. When they're gamed or chosen to minimize variance, EVM becomes a performance management illusion. The 4 discrete PMTs, 0 and hundredths, 50/50, milestone/weighted percent complete, and percent complete are the tools for measuring objectively completable work, each appropriate for a different work package duration and type. 0 1/100ths is the most objective, all or nothing, but only works for single-period tasks. Weighted milestones are the most commonly desired because they allow longer duration tasks to be measured at meaningful intermediate points. Least desirable, too subjective, percent complete is the technique that most often gets abused. If used, it requires quantitative backup data, QBD, that can actually justify the percentage claimed. Without QBD, it is an opinion dressed as a measurement. The 40-day detailed activity guideline is a practical constraint. Activities longer than 40 days that are measured by percent complete tend to produce the 80% complete syndrome, stuck at 80% for months while the real completion date recedes. The IBR is the formal joint review between NASA and the contractor that verifies whether the performance measurement baseline is realistic, properly integrated across scope, schedule, cost, and risk, and fully understood by the people who will execute it. The IBR validates that the baseline is executable, that the control account managers understand their plan, the resources are allocated to the right activities, and the schedule logic reflects reality. Ensures the PMB is realistic, executable, and fully understood. Fully understood is the one that trips up programs. A technically correct PMB that the CAMs cannot explain is not a credible baseline. Integration is at the center of the IBR diagram for a reason. The IBR is not just checking individual elements. It is verifying that cost, schedule, technical, and risk are telling a single consistent story. The timing of the IBR is specified after Phase B baseline approval and PMB establishment, typically within 90 to 180 days of contract award or a major baseline change, and before full EVM reporting begins. Reconducted if there are significant rebaselines, scope changes, or major replans. This is the condition I reference when describing the Mars rover replan that added a second rover. A change of that magnitude requires a new IBR. The IBR must precede full EVM reporting. You cannot meaningfully track performance against a baseline that hasn't been validated as executable. The IBR is the quality gate before performance measurement begins. Programs that receive contract awards in the middle of a fiscal year often feel time pressure to compress the IBR process. Resist this. A compressed IBR that misses planning deficiencies will produce 6 months of misleading performance data. 5 purposes define the IBR's value: baseline validation, realism assessment, risk identification, confidence building, and establishing the foundation for EVM performance reporting. Build confidence. Establish shared understanding of commitments between NASA and contractor. This is the soft benefit that gets overlooked. When the IBR works as designed, both parties leave with the same mental model of how the project will be executed. Identify risks. Highlight areas of high uncertainty, constraints, or under-resourced tasks. An IBR that produces no action items is either a sign of a perfect baseline or an incomplete review. Real programs have issues. The IBR should find them. Foundation for control is the lasting outcome. The PMB validated at the IBR becomes the reference baseline for every variance analysis, every EAC, and every corrective action for the life of the program. 6 dimensions define the IBR evaluation framework: scope completeness, schedule realism, cost integration, risk alignment, CM readiness, and resource adequacy. CM readiness. Do control account managers understand and own their plans? This is often the most revealing dimension. CAMs who cannot explain their plans, do not know their assumptions, or defer every question to the PP&C team are not ready to execute. Schedule realism. Is the IMS logic-driven, resource-loaded, and risk-informed? 3 criteria, all required. A schedule that is logic-driven but not resource-loaded, or resource-loaded but not risk-informed, is incomplete. IBRs that find no cost integration issues on programs that have obvious WBS schedule mismatches are IBRs that weren't conducted at the right level of detail. The findings should match the program's actual state. The IBR produces 4 outcomes: an agreed-upon set of action items, enhanced government confidence, a documented baseline of strengths and risks, and a foundation for EVM reporting, variance analysis, and corrective action. Successful IBR needed for transition to Phase C. This is the gate requirement. An IBR with open action items that haven't been resolved doesn't satisfy the transition criterion. The actions must be closed before the gate is complete. The action item set from an IBR serves as a risk register for the baseline. It documents the weaknesses found and the commitments made to address them. Tracking action item closure is part of the PP&C control function in early Phase C. Solid foundation for EVM reporting, variance analysis, and corrective action processes. This is why the IBR investment pays off. Programs that rigorously implement IBR have a head start on every subsequent analysis challenge. 6 questions form the EVMS readiness checklist, determining whether the EVM system is fully defined, realistic, aligned with WBS/schedule/financial systems, flowed down to contractors, validated, and staffed with trained personnel. Are you starting to see a theme here? Fully defined scope, realistic plan, documented approach. This theme recurs across all PP&C disciplines because it is the foundation of a credible program. Has EVM flowed down to our contracts? Is the question that catches programs off guard. If your prime contractor has a compliant EVMS, but your major subcontractors do not, your performance data has a significant gap in it. Is our staff knowledgeable and trained in EVM? Is the execution readiness question. EVMS that is technically compliant, but operationally misunderstood produces reports that appear correct, but do not reflect the project's reality. This transition slide introduces the risk management discipline within the planning architecture, the system that transforms identified uncertainties into quantified risks with mitigation plans and reserve requirements. Risk management is one of the planning elements that is sometimes overlooked or under-resourced. Programs that treat risk as a documentation exercise rather than a planning tool tend to be caught off guard by the very events they were supposed to anticipate. A robust risk management system is not just a register. It is a process that actively updates risk likelihood and consequence, drives mitigation investment, and informs the UFE and schedule margin requirements. The cost of actively managing risk is real, but small compared to the cost of ignoring it. There is a cost to actively managing risk. The cost of ignoring risk is usually far greater. Risk is defined precisely: a future event with some probability of occurring that has negative consequences. The definition is important because it distinguishes risk, future, uncertain, from problem, present, certain. My emphasis on some probability, not a certainty, is the conceptual line that separates risk management from crisis management. When the probability reaches 100%, you are not managing risk. You are managing a problem that has already occurred. Whatever might prevent mission success is the scope definition. Risk management should cast a wide net across technical, cost, schedule, external, and organizational risks, not just the obvious technical ones. Understanding the precise definition of risk allows analysts to correctly categorize events as risks versus problems, a critical distinction because the response strategies are different and the reserve implications are different. Risks must be captured and managed in a formal risk tracking system. NASA has tools such as ARM and Callisto that provide standardized risk capture formats and reporting capabilities. The tool matters less than the discipline. A well-maintained spreadsheet-based risk register is more useful than a poorly maintained enterprise system. What matters is that risks are captured consistently, assessed regularly, and linked to cost and schedule impacts. Risk tracking systems that aren't reviewed at the monthly management cycle quickly become outdated and lose credibility. If the risks in the system do not reflect the current project status, leadership will stop trusting the system. The risk register is not just a PP&C product. It is a communication tool. Lead systems engineers, project managers, and agency review boards all read it. Its quality reflects the analytical rigor of the entire program team. The risk management process converts raw risk data into decision-useful information. Risk statements are validated, classified by consequence and probability, and organized in a Class 1, 2, and 3 categories for escalation. Risk statement structure matters: condition, consequence, and context. A risk that cannot be stated in this 3-part format probably hasn't been sufficiently analyzed to be actionable. The classification system, Class 1, 2, 3, drives where the risk is managed and who is responsible for mitigation. Getting the classification wrong means risks are either over-escalated, wasting management attention, or under-escalated, not receiving the mitigation resources they need. Risk data must be converted into a usable format for management decisions. This is exactly the role of the analyst I described throughout this course. Raw data doesn't inform decisions. Classified, prioritized, and cost-quantified risk does. The 5x5 risk assessment matrix maps likelihood against consequence to produce the green/yellow/red risk classification that determines escalation level and management reserve implications. My general rule: green risks are manageable at the project level. Yellow risks may need institutional support, and red risks require agency-level intervention. The classification is not just descriptive. It determines who owns the mitigation. Risks represent a cost threat and must be assessed for impact to reserves posture or project budget. This is the link between the risk matrix and the UFE calculation. High consequence, high likelihood risks must be funded in the reserve. The 5x5 matrix is a communication tool as well as an analytical tool. When you brief the project manager or the SRB, the color tells the story immediately. Most of the analytical work happens in getting the placement right. 3 categories require clear distinction: uncertainty, general future unknowns; risks, anticipated future problems with some probability. and problems, events that have already occurred with 100% probability. Problems are events that have occurred. 100% probability of occurrence means it is a problem, not a risk. Problems require decisions. Therefore, they always create new risks. This chain drives both the reserve posture and the forward risk register. Managing uncertainty is the upstream activity, identifying what we do not know and narrowing the uncertainty through analysis, testing, and definition. Some uncertainty resolves into risks. Some resolves into no problem at all. Programs that conflate risk and problem tend to mismanage both. They apply risk mitigation strategies to problems that need immediate action, and they treat problems as risks to be monitored rather than issues to be resolved. The first set of risk sources is schedule-related. Incomplete scope, unrealistic durations, logic problems, synchronization failures, resource overcommitment, and artificial constraints. Critical path issues and incomplete scope of work are the top two risk sources from a scheduling perspective, and they're also the ones most directly linked to cost overruns. A schedule that doesn't capture all the scope will never be right. Required activities not included in schedule and out-of-scope activities reflected in schedule are opposite errors that both cause problems. One leads to hidden overruns, the other creates false optimism about completion. The analyst's job when reviewing a schedule against the risk register is to determine whether the top risk areas are represented by schedule activities with appropriate durations and resources. If the risk register lists software integration as high risk, but the schedule has only 6 weeks for it, you have a problem. The second set of risk sources includes process failures, external factors, and organizational weaknesses, categories that are harder to quantify, but often more damaging than technical risks. Inexperienced project management organization and incomplete, ill-defined, and unrealistic project requirements are the root causes I've seen most consistently in programs that fail at PDR or suffer major FACE overruns. Schedule risk assessment was not performed is itself a risk. It means the program is committing to a schedule without understanding its confidence level, which is exactly the condition the JCL requirement is designed to prevent. External factors, labor relations, weather, economy, appear last on the list but can dominate execution. Programs that do not include external factors in their risk register have a risk register that doesn't reflect the actual threat environment. Risk translates to cost through unallocated future expense, UFE, the reserve funds that provide a financial buffer against the risks that have been identified and those that haven't yet been anticipated. UFE is different from the project budget. It sits outside the PMB. When risks become problems, UFE is drawn down to fund the mitigation or recovery actions. When risks are retired, UFE stays available for future unknowns. Schedule margin is the temporal equivalent of UFE. It sits in the schedule as a buffer between the working estimate and the commitment date. Both must be sized based on actual risk analysis, not formulas or rules of thumb. There will be unknown unknowns. UFE is not just for identified risks. It is for the events you didn't anticipate. Historical analysis of similar programs gives you the best basis for sizing it. 6 questions form the Risk Management System Quality Checklist, verifying that the risk process is documented, standardized, linked to cost and schedule, managing uncertainty appropriately, and supported by adequate reserves. Do you have adequate UFE and/or schedule margin? Is the most visible risk management output question. A program with a well-populated risk register but inadequate reserves hasn't completed the risk management process. It has identified risks without funding the mitigation. Are cost and schedule impacts captured? This is the integration requirement. A risk register that lists risks without quantifying their cost and schedule implications cannot feed the JCL analysis or reserve sizing. Answering yes to all 6 questions means you have a risk management system, not just a risk register. The distinction is important. A system is active, linked to decisions, and updated regularly. A register is a list. 5 specific business requirements must be met to transition from formulation to implementation. JCL at 70% plus, an integrated cost and schedule baseline, a final cost estimate, a final detailed schedule, and a successful IBR if EVM is required. My point is, these aren't sequential deliverables. They're interdependent products that must all be in place and consistent before the gate is complete. A JCL built on a schedule that hasn't been validated in the IBR is not a credible JCL. These 5 deliverables together constitute the agency baseline commitment. When the project manager signs the ARC, they're attesting that all 5 are complete, integrated, and defensible. That's the highest stakes signature in the program's history. Missing any one of these 5 will prevent the gate transition or produce a conditional approval that comes with risk watch items. Either outcome signals to the review board that the program's planning phase wasn't completed properly. The JCL is a probabilistic assessment that determines the likelihood of project success given the integrated cost, schedule, and risk environment. It must demonstrate at least 70% confidence before the project can commit to implementation. At a simple level, the JCL is the probability that you will complete your project on time and under budget. At a sophisticated level, it is a Monte Carlo simulation that integrates your cost range, schedule uncertainty, and risk register. JCL is also used to determine reserve or UFE levels needed. This is the sizing function. Programs that size their UFE based on rules of thumb rather than JCL output tend to be either over-reserved, wasting budget, or under-reserved, underfunded for their actual risk exposure. The 70% standard is deliberately conservative. It means 30% of JCL outcomes exceed the committed cost and schedule. A 70% JCL is not a guarantee. It is a statement that the program has made credible commitments with adequate reserves for the level of uncertainty present. Beyond meeting the regulatory requirement, JCL provides 5 specific decision support functions: reserve adequacy, schedule feasibility, risk area identification, risk mitigation strategy optimization, and funding phasing needs. This process is often more important to your success than the actual JCL number. The analytical discipline of building the JCL, assembling the schedule, loading cost, and mapping risks reveals program vulnerabilities that wouldn't be visible any other way. What risk mitigation strategies provide best benefit is the optimization question. JCL sensitivity analysis identifies which risks, if mitigated, produce the greatest improvement in confidence level. That guides reserve investment prioritization. JCL is the program's most honest self-assessment. It integrates everything the project knows about its uncertainties into a single probability statement. Programs that take it seriously use it to drive decisions, not just satisfy a requirement. JCL requires 3 data inputs: a schedule with uncertainty quantification, a cost with uncertainty ranges, and an identified risk register. The quality of a JCL depends entirely on the quality of these 3 inputs. Can you see now why it was important to have these things set up early in your program? The JCL is the integration point. If your schedule is weak, your cost estimate is thin, or your risk register is incomplete, the JCL output cannot be trusted. Data quality and integration are the JCL's Achilles heel. A technically correct Monte Carlo simulation run on poor data produces a falsely precise output. The JCL number looks authoritative but is not. The JCL data flow diagram reinforces the interdependence of all PP&C disciplines. Schedule, cost estimating, and risk management must all be in good shape for the JCL to be credible at PDR. 5 steps summarize the JCL process. Develop a summary analysis schedule. Load cost onto schedule activities. Incorporate a risk list. Conduct uncertainty analysis. And calculate and view results. Develop a summary analysis schedule. This is often misunderstood. You do not run the JCL on a 10,000-line IMS. You build a summary schedule of the key drivers, hundreds of activities, not thousands, that captures the critical path structure. Calculate and view results. Analyze scatterplot, run sensitivities, and refine. The refine step is where most of the analytical value is extracted. Sensitivity analysis tells you which inputs drive the most outcome variability, which is where you focus management attention. A closing note: the JCL number is less important than the process. A program that thoughtfully executes the JCL has examined its schedule assumptions, quantified its cost uncertainty, and mapped its risks to specific schedule activities. That discipline produces a more credible plan regardless of the JCL output. Two primary tools are used for JCL analysis at NASA: Polaris from Booz Allen Hamilton and JCS from Techaload. Both are available free to NASA users and are the HQ-approved platforms. Teaching how to do a JCL is beyond this course's scope. If you need a JCL, consult with experts at your center and the Cost Analysis Division. The tool is the easy part. The hard part is the data quality and the risk quantification methodology. Both tools implement Monte Carlo simulation. They require the same input quality, schedule, cost, risk, regardless of which one you use. Center preference often determines which tool is chosen, but expert guidance is required to use either effectively. Many programs use JCL consultants for their first formal JCL and then develop internal capability over time. The investment in training pays off. Programs that have internal JCL capability can run sensitivity analyses in response to design changes without waiting for external support. The JCL scatter plot visualizes the distribution of Monte Carlo simulation outcomes. Each dot represents a possible combination of cost and schedule completion given the inputs, with the concentration revealing the project's probability distribution. The upper right dot represents every risk occurring, worst case. The lower left represents no risks occurring, best case. The density of dots in any quadrant shows the probability of outcomes in that range. The yellow dot, your cost and schedule estimate, should sit near the center of the dot distribution, not at the optimistic edge. If your estimate is in the lower left of the distribution, you've committed to something achievable only if very little goes wrong. Programs sometimes use the JCL scatter plot to negotiate the commitment. If the scatter plot shows 56% joint probability at the planned cost and schedule, either the reserves must increase or the commitment date must move to get to 70%. Reading a JCL scatter plot correctly requires understanding that a 70% cost confidence and a 70% schedule confidence do not combine to a 70% joint confidence. The joint probability frontier is lower because both must be achieved simultaneously. The frontier curve shown in the example produces a 56% joint probability, meaning even if each dimension achieves 70% individually, the joint confidence is only 56%. This is why the JCL is the required metric, not separate cost and schedule confidence levels. 16% dots in red quadrant. These are the outcomes where both cost and schedule exceed the commitment. Reducing this percentage, moving dots out of the red quadrant, is the goal of risk mitigation investment. The practical implication: to achieve 70% joint confidence, you typically need cost confidence and schedule confidence that are each higher than 70%. This is why JCL almost always requires more reserves than preliminary analysis suggests. This transition slide moves the module to contract management, the discipline that governs how NASA acquires the contractor capability that executes the vast majority of program work. NASA contracts out approximately 80% of its work. This means the contract management function holds the greatest potential for PP&C impact. Most program dollars flow through contracts, and the contract terms determine how those dollars can be tracked and managed. Contract management is a PP&C function, not just a procurement function. The PP&C analyst is responsible for understanding the contractor's cost reporting, evaluating performance, and supporting the evaluation of proposed contract changes. This area holds potential for greatest impact of proper PP&C management. Mastering contract management makes you significantly more valuable to any DoD or NASA Program Office. 5 contract management focus areas define the PP&C role: acquisition approach, contractor performance evaluation, change proposal evaluation, award fee structuring, and contract reporting requirements. Structure award fees around cost and schedule performance to a greater degree. This is the behavioral incentive insight. Award fees that do not measure cost and schedule performance do not enkindle the contractor behaviors that protect the program. Proper contract reporting is the data pipeline. Form 533, CPR formats, and EVM reports are the primary sources of contractor financial data. If the reporting is inadequate, your analysis will be working from incomplete information. Greater knowledge of federal acquisition procedures is listed because PP&C analysts who do not understand FAR/NFS basics are limited in what they can see and do. A working knowledge of acquisition policy makes the analyst far more effective in evaluating contractor proposals. 6 types of solicitations: RFQ, RFP, IFB, AO, NRA, and CAN define the acquisition landscape, each appropriate for different commodity types, dollar thresholds, and selection criteria. The RFP column is the one that matters most for major development programs. It is used for services, R&D, studies, and major programs, and awards contracts of any type using best value criteria. Understanding which solicitation type is being used tells you the competitive landscape, the evaluation criteria, and the contractual instrument that will result. This knowledge is essential when you're evaluating whether the acquisition strategy will protect the program's interests. Announcement of opportunity and NASA research announcement types are the science world's entry points. They're how the science community participates in missions. PP&C professionals supporting science-driven programs need to understand these as well. 4 factors determine which procurement vehicle is appropriate: requirement size and value, complexity and definition, risk level and distribution, and principal purpose. If risk exists to any degree, a contract will be required. Contract type will determine where the majority of risk is born. This is the most important procurement design decision PP&C analysts influence. The wrong contract type puts risk on the party least able to manage it. What do we want? What is the best means of delivery? For early phase R&D programs where requirements aren't fully defined, cost reimbursement is almost always the appropriate vehicle. Fixed-price development contracts create catastrophic overruns that are well documented in both DoD and NASA history. PP&C analysts do not make acquisition decisions, but they provide the cost and risk analysis that informs those decisions. Knowing what to look for in a procurement vehicle determination makes you a more effective analytical contributor. 3 cost contract types, CPAF, CPIF, and CPFF, provide different incentive structure for development work where requirements aren't fully defined, and cost risk must be shared between government and contractor. Find program elements that can be fixed price where possible, but the critical caveat is where possible. Using fixed price on development work that is not defined creates the opposite problem. The contractor bids low to win and then seeks get well on modifications. CPEF is common in science mission development because it allows the government to score contractor performance subjectively across multiple dimensions. CPIF is used when specific measurable performance targets can be defined. CPFF is appropriate for ongoing support services. Find program elements which can be procured through fixed price, if possible. This is the right direction. Phasing work appropriately, cost type for development, fixed price for production, is how mature programs manage contract risk over the life cycle. Time and materials and IDIQ contracts serve specific purposes. T&M for defined tasks with uncertain scope, IDIQ for flexible ordering of services or supplies as needs emerge. T&M is the least preferred because it provides no cost control incentives for the contractor. They bill for hours at a fixed rate regardless of whether the work is efficient. Use it only when the skill mix is well defined, but the quantity of work genuinely is not. IDIT contracts are more prevalent than people realize across NASA centers. They provide flexibility to respond to evolving needs through task orders rather than new contracts. PP&C analysts working with IDIQ contracts need to track task order spending carefully. Contract type selection is a PP&C input, even though procurement makes the decision. Understanding the cost control implications of each type means you can flag when a contract vehicle creates financial visibility problems before the contract is awarded. 7 Cost control principles for contract management. Matching contract type to program objectives, upfront identification of requirements, comprehensive data deliverable definition, rigorous change review, clear technical direction authority, and thorough contractor oversight. Make every attempt to identify all contract requirements up front prior to negotiation. This is the same principle as the WBS 100% rule applied to acquisition. Contract modifications are expensive, not just financially, but in schedule and management attention. Identify all data deliverables in order to provide sufficient insight for proper assessment. This is the PP&C self-interest statement. If the contract doesn't require the reporting data, you need to do your analysis. You'll be making decisions based on incomplete information. Ask only for what you're willing to pay for. Every deliverable on the contract has a cost. Don't include deliverables you will not use. Do include every deliverable you need for credible analysis. The first set of common contract data deliverables covers product assurance, safety plans, hazard analyses, fracture control, software assurance, reliability reports, and similar technical compliance documentation. These deliverables exist to protect the mission. They're not administrative overhead. But from a PP&C perspective, they represent scheduled deliverables that must appear in the IMS and be tracked as scheduled performance events. Product assurance deliverables are often the first to slip when programs are under schedule pressure. They're seen as paperwork rather than critical path items. Track them as early warning indicators of broader schedule health. Reviewing product assurance deliverable status monthly, as part of the routine contractor reporting review, provides early visibility into technical compliance issues before they surface as formal findings during a major review. The second deliverable category covers contractual and program management data. The Form 533 financial report, EVM reports, technical reporting, and the program management plans that govern execution. The Form 533 Contractor Financial Management Report is the primary financial data source for NASA programs. As Bill describes, it provides labor dollars, overhead, ODCs, subcontracts, and fee, all the cost elements needed for credible analysis. EVM report and Form 533 working together give you cost performance against plan. Without both, you have either the financial actuals, 533, or the performance measurement data, EVM, but not the integrated picture. Know which of these deliverables your contract requires, when they're due, and what your program office's process is for reviewing them. Late deliverables often signal contractor financial management problems before the financial problems show up in the numbers. Requirements and design deliverables, systems requirements, ICDs, product drawings, software design documents represent the technical baseline documentation that defines what the contractor is building. One of my key points is, ask only for what you're willing to pay for. Every deliverable on the contract data requirements list has a cost. Unnecessary deliverables waste contractor resources that could be directed at execution. Design deliverables are both schedule milestones and technical products. Drawing release rate, ICD completion status, and review presentation packages should all appear in the IMS as measurable activities with specific completion criteria. When a contractor is struggling with cost or schedule, one of the first places you'll see it is in the quality and timeliness of design deliverables. Superficial drawings, late deliveries, and incomplete documentation are leading indicators of deeper execution problems. Operations and verification deliverables, logistics plans, operator manuals, verification procedures, integration data packages represent the back half of the program lifecycle, with planning that should start in Phase C. These deliverables are easily overlooked in early Phase C because the focus is on hardware development. But the schedule for operations documentation must be in the IMS from the beginning. Late verification procedures delay TRR, which delays FRR, which delays launch. Verification deliverables are the gateway products for major reviews: ORR, MRR, FRR. If the IMS doesn't have the preparation and completion of these documents scheduled with appropriate lead time, the reviews will slip. Operations and verification data are the products that prove the hardware works and the mission is ready. PP&C analysts who track these deliverables monthly know whether the program is on a credible path to launch readiness. 7 contract assessment questions form the acquisition quality checklist, verifying that the acquisition strategy is sound, timelines are adequate, data deliverables are calibrated, incentives are appropriate, and performance evaluation is planned. Is adequate time allowed for contracting and delivery of goods and services? This question catches the most common planning error. The IMS shows hardware arriving on a schedule that assumes contracting actions haven't started yet. Have we established expectations of project staff to manage, understand, and report contractor performance? This is the human side of contract management. The best contract structure in the world fails if the government team doesn't know how to use it. A yes to all 7 questions means the program has a sound acquisition strategy. In practice, most programs can answer yes to most questions. The ones they cannot answer are the ones that deserve immediate attention. The Module 1 summary confirms that by this point, the program has established its organizational structure: WBS, cost estimates, IMS, EVMS, risk management system, and contract framework, the complete planning architecture. What should follow? Budget execution of cost plan, KDPC, JCL, QRAs. After planning, you are maturing your BOEs, schedule, risks, and they're used later to develop your JCL. Planning is not finished. It feeds execution. The 7 planning elements listed here are not independent products. They're an integrated system. If any one is missing or weak, the others are compromised. A credible EVMS built on an incomplete WBS is not credible. It is 3 years later approaching KDPC. The planning phase of a major NASA program takes years. The product described in this module are not one-time deliverables. They're continuously matured throughout phases A and B until they're ready for the commitment gate. 3 questions test the Module 1 learning objectives, schedule, baseline credibility, the WBS 100% rule, and the distinction between work packages and planning packages. Q1's answer connects schedule credibility to 8 specific validation criteria introduced in slide 55. They cannot be answered abstractly. Q2's downstream consequence example should trace scope gaps to missing cost accounts, unplanned activities, and EAC overruns. Q3's answer must include the timing trigger. 6 months prior to work beginning is the standard, and the conversion requirements, which define the discrete scope, assign a PMT, and establish a schedule and budget for the work package. These questions represent the analyst's daily job. A PP&C professional who cannot answer all 3 fluently without notes hasn't internalized the planning framework that enables credible analysis. Budget planning. Now that we've established the program baseline, we'll move into budget planning. This section focuses on how mission needs are translated into annual funding requirements, how budgets are developed and phased, and how programs secure the resources needed to successfully execute their plans.